Thank you for coming to a coffee shop. I've never taken part in a coffee shop session before, so I'm not entirely sure what it involves. I've learnt two things though so far. One is that it doesn't seem to involve any coffee. And the second thing is that it does seem to involve quite a lot of having your photograph taken. So I don't know whether that's a real part of the proceedings or not, but anyway, we'll make it happen. Okay, I'm Keith Morrow, as you may remember if you were at the debate last night. And the reason I'm here doing this session on getting published in an academic journal is because until very recently, until the end of last year, I was the editor of an academic journal. I was the editor of the ELT Journal, and I was in that post for 17 years. So in that time I learned quite a lot about what academic journals are looking for in terms of the articles that they publish, or at least what ELT Journal, as an academic journal, is looking for. I'm going to be talking very largely from the perspective of ELT Journal, but I think what I say is going to be true about a wide range of academic journals in any situation, in any context. When I asked the organisers, what do you mean by a coffee shop, they said, well, it's a small, intimate gathering, a chance for you to have a real interaction with the participants in a much less formal way than a full presentation. And I thought, oh great, so we'll be in a nice little room and we can sit down and have a chat, and I can talk about a few things and we can discuss issues. And now we're in the main hall with 300 people here, and it's like being in a lecture theatre. So it may not be quite as intimate as we would like, but I do plan, and I hope that there will be lots of opportunity during this time for you to ask questions and for us to explore things together. I've given some sort of a structure in my head to how we might spend our time, and I thought it might be useful if we start off with a little bit of presentation from me about an academic journal, and then we can have some questions about that. And then I've got another bit of a presentation about what we're looking for in an article that is published, and we can have a little bit of a discussion about that. And then I've got a bit of a presentation about what an academic journal is not looking for, and we can have a bit of a discussion about that. And then it'll probably be the end, I suspect, by the time we've had all of that. So a little bit of presentation, a little bit of input from me, and then I hope a lot of questions and discussion of issues from you. Okay, so the theme, as you can see, is getting published in an academic journal. And the first thing we need to say, the first question we need to ask, obviously, is, what is an academic journal? What do we mean by an academic journal? And what makes it different from any other form of magazine or newsletter or any other form of written communication? It's different from a blog, it's different from a newsletter, it's different from a magazine. What is it about an academic journal that makes it specific, that makes it special? Oh, could we have the presentation on the screen, not me, please? Thank you very much. I want to talk a little bit about the role of the editor of an academic journal, because that's quite an important feature. And a little bit about the role of peer review, and then to emphasize the fact that not all journals are equal. I'll explain what I mean by that. Notice there, though, that I've introduced the word journal, because I think a journal is what we mean, what I'm talking about in this context, as an academic piece of writing, an academic publication. Journals like, well, ELT Journal, Applied Linguistics, System, international journals of that sort, TEC Quarterly would be another one. International journals of that sort, and no doubt journals published in India that I'm not so familiar with, but which you will obviously know from your own context. Now, what differentiates a journal from a magazine or a newsletter is that the decision whether to publish something in the journal or not is not made by the editor alone. It is not the case that you send an article to the editor of the journal, the editor looks at it and says, oh, that's very interesting, we'll publish it. No. Before the journal can publish the article, it has to go through a process which is called a peer review. And I'll talk a little bit more about peer review and what it involves in a moment. But essentially, what that means is that the editor of the journal sends your article off to experts in the field, experts in the particular field that your article covers. And by experts, we mean people who are working in that field, people who are or the contributors' peers in terms of their professional background and professional interests. So the editor, by sending the article out for peer review, is trying to ensure that what is published is of a good quality, and that it will be of interest to people in the field. And the best judge of that are people who are working in the field, in other words, peers, and therefore that's why it's called peer review. We'll talk more about that in a second, and how it works and doesn't work. But I just want to introduce this idea that not all journals are equal. I'm not sure that equal is quite the right word when I come to think about it, but I do want to get across the idea that journals are different. And if you are writing something, if you want to write a paper, write a report about a piece of work that you've carried out, or an experiment that you've done, or something that you've discovered in the field, if you want to write that up for publication, then you need to think very, very carefully where you are going to have it published, or where you want to have it published, and then make sure that you write your article to meet the requirements and the audience of that particular journal. If you go away from this meeting with one idea in your head, please let this be the idea. And the idea to keep in your head is, before you start writing a paper, think about where you want to have it published and write it to meet the requirements of that journal. Don't, please, sit in your office, sit in your study, sit at the kitchen table, wherever you're. Don't sit down and write a paper and think, okay, this is wonderful, where shall I get it published? We'll send it off here, send it off there, it will be rejected. It has no chance of getting published at all unless it is specifically written to the requirements of particular journals. You may be asking yourself at this point, why bother writing for an academic journal? It's hard work, you have to think about a lot of things when you've probably got enough to think about already. But it seems to me that there are two good reasons why writing and getting published in an academic journal is a good thing. And very briefly, they are because it helps your personal, professional development. A number of speakers at this conference have already said that until they sit down to write something or try to explain it to somebody else, they don't realize what they're doing. It's a way of helping you personally to explain to yourself, as well as to the readers of the article, what it is that you've done and why that is interesting and why it is worth publishing. So for your own professional development, the process of writing an article is very important. And of course, if you get an article published in an academic journal, wow, that's good for your professional status and your professional development. But equally, it's important for the development of the profession, because the way that our profession moves forward is by people sharing ideas and sharing experiences and sharing lessons that they've learnt through their work. And one way of doing that, of course, is to come to conferences. there are lots of other ways now through blogs and through Facebook and through groups online, through Twitter. But sharing things in a professional journal gives them a certain status. And it allows us, all of us, to go to journals and see what other people are doing and see what other people have done and learn from that. And that's how the profession moves forward, by learning from colleagues who have taken the time and the trouble to write up their work and to get it published. It's a way we can keep in touch with the broader ELT, in our case, community. All right, now probably no discussion about that. We'll move on then and talk a little bit about the process of getting published. But before we do, let's just go back. Has anybody got any queries or any comments or anything they'd like to ask about this very general issue of what makes a journal academic? Why the role of the editor is so significant, why we bother with peer review. If you've got a question or a comment, stick your hand out. There's a gentleman here who's got one, and we'll try and deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for giving me this a chance. Actually, when we are going to publish a paper, we are not just concerning the type of the paper or the type of the journal that we are going to publish our paper in. We are also concerning the impact factor of that journal. So when we will find the high impact factor of that journal, we are trying to send our papers to that journal to be accepted or to be published. And we will, when we are finding those high impact journals, maybe we will not think about the type of the journal that we are publishing our papers in. Thank you.
Okay, well, just to comment on that, I mean, there are lots of reasons why you may want to publish with a particular journal. An impact factor, which we can talk about later if you like, may be one reason. But even so, if you have identified a journal with an impact factor and you say, this is the one that I'm writing for, well then you have to tailor your article to the needs and the requirements of that journal that you've chosen. So I think the point holds that for whatever reason you've chosen journal X, you have to look at journal X very carefully, see what sort of papers it publishes, see the requirements, see the style, see the length, see the focus, and then make sure that your article fits those requirements. Okay? There's a lady at the front here.
How do we get to know what the requirements of the journal are?
Okay, thank you very much. I'll come to that in a few moments. The simple answer is, there are two simple answers. One is to look at the journal, to look at back copies of the journal, to familiarize yourself with the journal in question, which these days almost all journals have a website, and on most journals you can download a free sample copy of that particular journal to look at and to examine. So one way is to familiarize yourself with the journal. And the second thing to do is also, from the journal's website, download a copy of their style sheet, or their information for authors, or their publishing requirements, whatever they call it. There will be something on the website which is there to guide prospective authors about their particular requirements. Okay. All right, one more question for this, and then we'll okay, two more questions. This one, and then the one at the back. So this one first, then at the back.
Can you say something more about the role of importance of the peer review?
Thank you. Yes, I'll say a little bit more about that later, but the importance of the peer review, I'll talk more about the process later, but the importance of peer review can't be overemphasized. Peer review is what sets apart an academic journal from a newsletter where the editor may make the decision on his own or on her own. And it gives this status to the journal, which is what people who are publishing in the journal want for their work. They want it to be published in an outlet which has status. So the importance of peer review is in establishing the value of the work that is published, so that the readers can trust it and the author can get the credit, honestly, for publishing in a peer-reviewed journal. Okay. But I'll talk more later about the process of peer review. So one at the back, and then we'll move on.
Sir, I have a doubt. How do I differentiate between a paid journal and the other journals?
I'm sorry, between a
Paid journals.
paid journal. You mean a journal which you have to pay in order to get your article published in?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, this is a trend which is becoming more popular, sometimes even for online journals. To be perfectly honest with you, I have no experience of paid journals. I don't know quite how they work and how they balance the interests of accepting an article because they want the money from the author against the peer review, the strict quality control which is required. Now, I just don't know what mechanisms journals have in place to balance that. My experience with ELT Journal and the other journals that I mentioned, System, TEC Quarterly, Applied Linguistics and so on, all of those are, well, none of those are paid journals. The author does not pay to have his or her work published in those journals. So it is something to look out for, and if you are asked for money to pay to have your article published, I think you need to look very carefully into the background of the journal and to make sure that it's not just a scam of some sort to get your money and then publishing something which has no value. So I think it's a buyer beware situation, and I can't honestly tell you very much more than that. About how it works if you decide to submit an article, from the editor's perspective and from the contributor's perspective as well. So first of all, the article is sent in, the article is acknowledged. Most journals now ask you to submit your article online, and they have a special online submission system. Again, full details of that will be on the journal's website. So that's another reason why you need to go to the website of the particular journal that you're planning to submit to, and look at their submission procedures. So normally online, you'll submit your article to the journal, and you'll get back an acknowledgement. In the case of an online submission, you'll get an instant acknowledgement from the submission system to say, we've received your article, thank you very much, and it is being processed, and we'll get back to you. Now, the next thing that happens is that the editor looks at the article on the submission system, reads through it, and makes an immediate decision. And the immediate decision which the editor makes is, do I reject this article straight away because it is clearly not suitable for this journal, or do I send it out for peer review? Now, I have to tell you that in my experience working with the ELT Journal, something like 50 or 60% of the articles that were sent to us were immediately rejected at this stage, simply because the person sending in the article had not done what I asked you to do, and that is, they had not looked at ELT Journal, they'd not seen the sort of articles that we publish, they hadn't submitted, it was either far too long or far too short for ELT Journal, it was over-referenced or under-referenced, it clearly did not meet our submission requirements. And in a case like that, it is just immediately rejected. we write back to the author and say, I'm very sorry, thank you for sending the article, but we're very sorry, it doesn't meet the submission requirements of ELT Journal because and that's the end of it. So your first job as a contributor is to get over this first hurdle. And the way to do that is to look at the journal, to write your article for the journal, to follow the submission guidelines, and to essentially to play the rules of the game. And the rules of the game are set out in the submission guidelines. If the editor looks at it and thinks, yeah, this is potentially interesting, it meets our requirements, it's in an area that we're interested in publishing in, let's send it out for peer review. So the editor gathers together a bunch of articles and then sends them off for peer review. In the case of the ELT Journal, I would send each article to at least 2 reviewers, 2 peer reviewers, who are chosen on the grounds that I said earlier, because they know about the field that the article deals with, and they are people who are established in the profession and who have a status as people who are able to make judgments about the value of the paper. ELT Journal has a panel of reviewers, peer reviewers. Some journals don't have a panel, they select individual reviewers from the profession at large to deal with submissions. But on ELTJ we work with a panel. But however it's done, the reviews are sent out, the articles are sent out, your article is sent out for peer review, and then it comes back to the editor. Normally, perhaps 3 or 4 weeks later, because reviewers, peer reviewers, are normally very busy people, and they don't normally get paid to review articles. They do it as part of their professional contribution. So they're often too busy to return a review immediately. It can take 3 or 4 weeks for it to come back to the editor. And the editor has a look at what the reviewers say, and then in the light of what the reviewers have said, the editor will come back to you, the contributor, with a decision. And the decision may be reject. It's a fact of life. I have to share with you that a lot of articles submitted to journals are rejected. Journals get a lot of submissions. They have limited space each year for publishing articles. In the ELT Journal, we have 4 issues a year. We publish about 8 or 9 articles in each issue, 36 maybe in a year. We get 300, 400, 500 submissions, so the chances are you may, certainly at first, get rejections from journals. You may get a request revision. That means that the editor will say to you, yeah, this is basically interesting, but the reviewers think that you need to provide more evidence about this part, or you need to change this part, or you need to rewrite your literature review, or you need to give a better conclusion to the article. But we feel that in principle there's interesting material here. We invite you to revise it along these lines. In that case, the resubmitted article, if you accept the invitation and revise it, then the article will go out again for peer review when you send it in. Sorry, can I have the slide back? Thank you. The other, another decision you might get in your letter from the editor is a conditional accept. That means, yeah, this is really interesting. We're almost certain that we can accept this, but we just need to ask you, please, to change this sentence here, or to put another paragraph in here. Very, very minor revisions before we can accept it. You send that back, And in this case, normally the revised article is just reviewed by the editor. It doesn't go out to peer review because you've only been asked to change a few small details. The editor can check if those things have been changed, and then it can be accepted. And you may, in the initial round, get a letter from the editor saying, "Thank you very much for sending this really interesting article. We're very pleased to accept it. It will appear in 6 months' time or a year's time, If you get a letter like that, just check that it's genuine. So I don't mean this seriously, but make sure somebody's not playing a joke on you, because it's actually very rare indeed for an article to be submitted and accepted with no changes, with no revisions being suggested. I think in the 17 years that I was editor of ELT Journal, I could certainly count on the fingers of one hand the number of articles that were accepted straight away with no revisions, with no changes requested at all. So it's very, very rare. So don't expect that by any means, but do expect that you will be asked to make some revisions before it goes forward to the publication. Okay, shall we stop at that point? Any questions, any comments, any queries about that? There's a lady over there with a red sleeve, I can see. Okay, thank you.
So my query is that it may get rejected, means at the very first time when the editor is reading it, he may reject it. Okay, fine. Is there some sort of, we can expect that personal, I don't say bias, but the personal interest of the editor up to the field in which the paper is, if it is meeting the personal interest of the editor is or not, if this sort of personal bias sort of thing can creep in there. And another query, sir, that if it gets rejected, then generally do editors send the reasons for which it is getting rejected so that the paper writer can redo and may send it to some other journal? Thank you.
Okay, well let me deal with the second question first, and the answer to that is yes. Most journals, and in the case of ELT Journal certainly, but most journals will give you quite a lot of feedback about why your article has been rejected. If it's been rejected at this first stage, and now I'm moving on in a way to deal with your first question, it's normally because it is quite clear that either the topic or the focus or the length or some very, very clear and obvious problem exists with the journal, which, I mean, I hope I can say that you can rely on the editor of a journal not to have a professional bias against particular things. But it is quite clear, and this is why it's very important to go back to the point that I made right at the start, that you have to look at a particular journal, look at the sort of material that's published in it, look at back copies, look at the sort of articles on the sorts of topics and the sorts of areas that this journal focuses on, and make sure that you are sending your article to the right journal. Because the editor may look at a topic and see that it's very interesting, but it's not something that this journal can actually deal with, can't cover. And that's nothing to do with bias, it's simply following the editorial policy of the journal. So yes to feedback, no to bias, I hope. Giving the review and getting the feedback is anonymous, and this is designed to help, or to avoid bias in the way that was mentioned over there, to avoid people being biased against submissions from this country or submissions by this person or submissions from this background. The reviewer has no idea who has written the article that they're reading. Does peer review work? Well, this is a great debate within the journals field. I don't think we've got a lot of time to go into it this evening. Just to say that there are people who feel that peer review is not an ideal process, because at the end of the day it comes down to the views of one or two, sometimes three reviewers, and it may be that for whatever reason those particular reviewers don't give a very reliable or valid judgment on a particular contribution. But at the same time, it has to be said that nobody has yet come up with a better way of ensuring quality in submitted articles. So at the moment, peer review is pretty well established in the journals field. Now, I'm not going to invite questions on that bit, but we might have a lot of questions about this. What are peer reviewers looking for? Now, there's a long list of things there that ELT Journal reviewers are looking for in submissions that are made to them. And all journals will have a similar checklist or list that they will give to their reviewers and say, please, when you're reviewing articles for this journal, bear in mind these features. Does the article meet these criteria? Now, they're on a long list. I'm just going to go through, I've got them on separate slides, I'm just going to go through them fairly quickly and then invite questions. Relevant and interesting to the readers of ELT Journal. Well, in a way that's obvious. If it's not relevant, if it's not interesting, then it's not worth publishing. And I'd stress the word interesting. If you're going to write an article, make it interesting. Make it tell a little story of some sort. Don't just say, well, we did this, we did this, we did this, and the outcome was this. That's boring. You want something which catches the reader's attention. Clearly and coherently written. Well, again, you would expect that. But can I just say that what is clear and coherent is a slightly personal, and to some extent cultural, concept. That's why it's very important to look at back copies of the journal to get an idea of what that journal considers clear and coherent. And I say this with some trepidation in this context, in this audience, but I have to say that the norms of coherence which apply to publication in most academic journals are not necessarily the same norms that apply in local varieties of the language, or even national varieties like Indian English. And I'm straying into very, very dangerous territory here, and I'm aware of that. But a lot of submissions that I've had from ELTJ, from contributors from India, have been written in a very recognisably Indian style, which I know is very prized in India in lots of ways. But it doesn't necessarily match the expectations of an internationally published journal. And that's why I go right back to the point that I made right at the beginning. If you're writing an article for publication in an international journal, look at that journal, look at the style in which articles are written in that journal, and then make sure that your submission follows those stylistic requirements and not what may be your personal stylistic requirements. Okay? That's a very difficult message to get across, but it's a pragmatic issue, that the journals have styles that they want to follow, and if you want to get published in those journals, then well, that's it. You need to follow that style. Internally consistent and accessible. You want to write in a way which the readers can easily understand. Accessibility is important. An appropriate balance between theory and practice, that's very important for ELT Journal particularly. All journals will have a particular position on the scale between highly theoretical and highly practical. ELTJ is somewhere in the middle on that scale, and so that's why the balance between theory and practice has to be right for us. And what that means is that, as you can see on the slide there, that practice relates to principles, to theoretical principles, so that you can make a connection between what you've done, if you're talking about classroom work. You can make a connection between what you've done and underlying theory and underlying practice. And that if you introduce theory and theoretical constructs, then you give practical examples of what this theory means in practice. This is another feature which very often causes problems for contributors to an international journal. Very often people write about what they have done in their classroom, which is often very, very interesting, but it is written and presented in such a way that it represents only a very local, very specific report. And an international journal, which has readers all over the world, working in many different contexts, will want to know why your report of your classroom experience will be of interest to them. So somebody who's writing about a specific example from a specific school or a specific context needs to draw out from that some lessons or some ideas which are generalizable to a broader context or a broader situation. It's in principle, it's a very good idea to base your article on work which you have done in a specific context, but it needs to be drawn out to, the implications need to be spelled out rather. Another thing that a journal article will be looking for is to see that the author is aware of other work that's been done in this field, in whatever the field is that you're writing about. You need to show that you have looked at the literature, that you've familiarized yourself with other work, so that you're not reinventing the wheel. You need to be able to make connections between what you're saying, what you've discovered, what you've done, and what other researchers or other teachers or other writers have done in different situations. So making connections is important. We're moving into the next section. All right, so those are the 8 or 9. I can't remember how many there are, but those are the points which reviewers will be looking for in a positive sense with the journal. Now, any questions or comments? I thought there might be a few. Okay.
I just wanted to check with you whether book reviews that are submitted for publication, do they undergo exactly similar process? Because I have a personal understanding. The article that I sent was not accepted, but the book review got published, so I just wanted to know.
Yeah. I'm talking here purely about articles. Book reviews are a separate category, commissioned by the reviews editor and evaluated and worked on by him or her. Okay. So, number 2.
I guess actually 2 questions.
Oh gosh.
Okay. So the first question is, you talked about the professional background of the peers. What about the linguistic background? Are they all the time native speakers, or sometimes they are non-native speakers when they do the reviews? The other question is, like when they go through the process of reviewing the paper, and later on they discover there is a small piece of the paper is plagiarized. So how they tackle the issue of plagiarism while they are doing the publishing process? Thank you.
Okay. Different journals have different policies about their reviewers. I can only speak for ELT Journal, but when I retired from ELT Journal, we had 17 members of the panel, 12 of whom were, whatever this means, non-native speakers. And let's not get into a debate about, what does a native speaker mean, but in a simplistic definition, they were non-native speakers. They were people who were not, oh gosh, no, don't take me down this line. We haven't got time to talk about it. But I would hold my hand up and say, yeah, these guys, 12 of them were non-native speakers, okay? Plagiarism is a big issue. Articles which a journal is considering for publication will always be run through plagiarism checking software, and if any problems crop up, then until those are resolved, the article won't be published. Okay. I've forgotten where we said number 2 was, but could we remember the lady was one of them said.
The writing style, for instance, Indian style, is that a criteria for rejection right away, or is it something that's considered something that can be revised and hence sent back for revision? And what are the odds of each of these things happening?
Right. Okay. I think purely stylistic or linguistic features would be a cause. Would lead to a request for revision rather than a rejection. Sometimes, I mean, if there are other problems with the paper as well, it may be that the paper gets rejected, and one of the reasons that it's rejected is because the style is not appropriate. But if the only problem is style, then we would normally send it back to the author and say, look, the content of this is really interesting, but there are stylistic issues. Would you like to rewrite it? Look very carefully at the ELTJ guidelines. Would you like them to rewrite it to try and bring it into line with the requirements of the journal? Okay?
So you made a point about coherence. How is Indian coherence different from international coherence?
I mean, this is not the place and the time, and I haven't got the data to give you a complete and thorough answer to the question. But all I can say is that reading submissions that come, I'm talking India because we're here in India, but the same argument or the same point applies to submissions from lots of other parts of the world, including, notably in a European context, submissions from Spain, where Spanish people who are accustomed to writing in Spanish have a very different coherence policy or coherence structure from what seems to be the norm in English. So I haven't got the data here in front of me. We can't sit down and look at a text and say it's this feature, this feature, this feature. All I can say is that for me as the editor reading the submission, it was clear, it is very often clear that the structure, the rhetorical structure of the writing is not that which is the norm in ELT Journal. Now, there is a big debate about whether international journals should or shouldn't accept, or should or shouldn't insist on particular norms. Pragmatically and practically, at the moment, they do. And so if you want your article to be published in an international journal, you have to bring your article in line with those international norms. And whether that is morally justified, ethically justified, that's a big area of debate. But practically and pragmatically, that's where we're at the moment. And until the situation changes, that's just the way it is, I'm afraid, that the editor and the panel will be looking for a particular type of rhetorical structure. And if you want to get published, you've got to follow that. I'm sorry. Let me just gallop very quickly through the next section, and this will then lead to our final bites of the cherry, and people can either stay and talk or wander off. So let's go through these. So what are we not looking for? What what immediately leads to rejection by the panel. Too theoretical, not sufficiently linked to practice. That's a no-no for ELTJ. It just doesn't meet our requirements. This is quite an interesting one. Too general and summative, no focus on real issues or contexts. If you're writing an article, make sure that your article is about something specific, something focused. Most journals are not interested in philosophical overviews of the field. What they want is something that you've done, something that has happened, something that you've tried, something that has worked or not worked. So it's something practical and specific that we're interested in. Again, as I said earlier, journals are on a continuum between those that are very theoretical and those that are very practical. You need to pitch your article at the right place on that continuum. So for ELT Journal, we are not interested in journals that are too academic, too research-oriented, too or over-referenced. One of the criteria for ELT Journal is that you have a maximum of 15 references to your article. Now that's not very many by journal standards, but that's the rule for ELTJ, maximum of 15 references. This is the opposite of the previous one, so that it will be rejected if there's no theory, if there's no connection between the practice that you're reporting and underlying theoretical principles. Again, if there's no recognition in your article of other work that has been done in a similar field, then again, that will be a minus point for you. You'll be asked to put that right. Again, we've talked about this. All of these, you may have noticed this, all of these are exactly the opposite of the ones that we looked at in the other round. They're looking at the same point from the opposite point of view. So if your article is too local, of no interest or relevance to people in other contexts, again, that's a no-no for ELTJ. This is quite an interesting one, an interesting idea, but not developed enough for publication. And by not developed enough, what we mean is that it's not doing these other things that the earlier criteria were looking for, making reference to other work in the field, making connections between what you've done, what other people have done, making connections between theory and practice, and so on. So it's an interesting idea, but it needs to be worked on. I don't want to get bogged down in this, but this is. There are sometimes problems with the standard of English. Most of them, I have to say, come from so-called native speakers, whatever that means. And a lot of native speakers who send in articles to the journal just can't write and produce amazing English. Anyway, these are things which are normally discussed with the author, and they can be put right at the editing stage. It's not a major problem. Style, we've talked about, inappropriate. And the last one raises ethical issues. Ethical issues, an example of an ethical issue might be a report of a language learning experiment which involved locking students in a darkened room for 3 weeks and feeding them only on water, and then discovering how much English they'd learnt at the end of that. Okay? So that would probably not pass the ethical test. I think you can see that. Okay. And a good article, but the wrong journal. I've made that point. Okay. And well, there may be other reasons, but I can't think what they are. But you may find that some other reasons crop up. Now, I think I've got lots more slides here that I could show if we had all evening, but I think I've covered the 3 things that I wanted to cover. We've looked a little bit at what an academic journal is and what peer reviewing is. We've looked at reasons why journals may publish your article, what they're looking for, and then thirdly, what they're not looking for. And all of those things, I think, are worth bearing in mind. I'm going to invite people, in a moment, I'm going to invite people who want to leave, and people who want to ask me questions to stay behind and ask me questions, because I realise time is getting on. But can I just say, please remember the very first thing that I said, and that I've repeated at least 4 times, here's the 5th time: if you're going to write an article, before you sit down and write it, decide where you want to get it published and look at that publications outlet and get to know that journal, get under the skin of that journal, and then write your article for that journal. And good luck. Okay, thank you very much.